"Fix my Ferrari and it's yours," mocked the billionaire, until the poor girl did the impossible, before continuing, "Please comment on which part of the world you are watching from." The Miami sun blazed mercilessly over the marble courtyard of the Grand Palacio Hotel, where power and privilege gathered like moths to a flame. Among the perfectly manicured palm trees and infinity pools, a crowd of suited executives, diamond-draped socialites, and eager journalists had assembled for one purpose: to witness Tariq al-Nashwan unveil his latest acquisition. At 38, Tariq commanded attention without effort. His tailored Italian suit cost more than most people earned in a year, and his presence radiated the kind of confidence that only came from never hearing the word no. The heir to a petroleum empire worth billions, he collected rare cars like others collected stamps, each one a testament to his untouchable status. "Ladies and gentlemen," Tariq's voice carried across the courtyard, smooth as aged whiskey, "may I present the crown jewel of automotive excellence, a 1967 Ferrari 330 P4, one of only 3 ever made." The Scarlet Beauty gleamed under the Florida sun, its curves reflecting the gasps and camera flashes of the assembled crowd, worth $12 million. It wasn't just a car. It was a statement, a middle finger to poverty, a reminder that some people lived in entirely different worlds. But in the shadows of that opulent gathering, barely visible behind a service entrance, stood a figure that didn't belong. 6-year-old Luna Martinez clutched a garbage bag filled with aluminum cans, her small hands stained with motor oil and dirt. Her oversized t-shirt hung like a tent over her tiny frame, and her worn sneakers had more holes than fabric. While the wealthy elite admired millions of dollars of machinery, Luna saw something they couldn't. She saw hope. In her world of broken dreams and empty stomachs, cars weren't symbols of status. They were puzzles waiting to be solved, engines waiting to sing, and sometimes, if she was very lucky, they were her ticket to tomorrow's meal. None of them knew that this moment, this collision of worlds, would change everything. Luna had been collecting cans since dawn, her small fingers expertly sorting aluminum from trash in the dumpsters behind Miami's most exclusive hotels. The Grand Palacio was her favorite hunting ground. Rich people threw away more in a day than her family saw in a month. But today was different. Today, the sound of engines and excited voices had drawn her away from her usual routine. She pressed herself against the service entrance gate, peering through the ornate bars at a world that seemed to exist in another dimension. The people inside moved with the casual grace of those who had never worried about their next meal, their laughter ringing hollow in her ears. But it wasn't the people that held her attention. It was the machines. Luna had inherited her father's gift with engines before she could even walk. Miguel Martinez had been the best mechanic in their neighborhood until the accident that crushed his hands and his dreams simultaneously. Now, confined to a wheelchair with nerve damage that made fine motor control impossible, he lived vicariously through his daughter's natural talent. "Mayoress Luna," he would whisper during their evening lessons in their garage-turned-bedroom, "engines don't lie. They don't care if you're rich or poor. They only care if you understand their language." And Luna spoke that language fluently. While other children her age played with dolls, Luna dismantled broken appliances, rebuilt lawnmower engines, and dreamed of the day she could afford real tools instead of the rusty collection her father had salvaged. She knew the sound of a perfectly tuned V8, could diagnose carburetor problems by ear alone, and had memorized the engine specifications of every Ferrari model ever made. So when Tariq al-Nashwan turned the key of his prized 330 P4 and nothing happened, Luna's heart skipped. She recognized the problem immediately, a subtle intake hiccup that the crowd of expensive suits completely missed. The chaos that followed was almost comical. Tariq's face darkened with embarrassment as mechanic after mechanic failed to identify the issue. His carefully orchestrated display of wealth had become a public humiliation, broadcast live on social media for millions to witness. "This is impossible," muttered James Crawford, Tariq's personal automotive specialist, wiping sweat from his brow. "I've been working on Ferraris for 20 years. The engine is perfect. The electronics are fine, the fuel system is clean." Luna watched as they checked and rechecked every obvious component, their expertise blinded by overthinking. They were looking for complex problems because simple ones didn't match the car's price tag. But Luna knew better. Sometimes the most expensive machines failed for the most basic reasons. The crowd grew restless. Phones captured every moment of Tariq's mounting frustration. His reputation, built on an image of perfection and control, was crumbling in real time. Deals worth millions hung in the balance, partnerships teetered on the edge of collapse, and his carefully curated persona as a man who owned the world began to crack. That's when his eyes landed on Luna. She stood out like a smudge on a pristine canvas, her presence an affront to everything the gathering represented. In his growing desperation and wounded pride, Tariq saw not a child, but an opportunity to deflect attention and salvage his dignity through cruel humor. The idea formed in his mind like poison. Why not make the situation about someone else's inadequacy instead of his own? "You there," he called out, his voice carrying across the courtyard like a whip crack. "Little girl with the trash bag." Every head turned. Cameras swiveled. The crowd fell silent, sensing blood in the water. Luna's grip tightened on her can-filled bag, but she didn't move. She had learned long ago that running from bullies only made them chase harder. Tariq approached the gate with the predatory confidence of a man accustomed to crushing anything that threatened his image. His smile was sharp enough to cut glass as he prepared to turn his humiliation into someone else's nightmare. The security guard hesitated when Tariq gestured for him to open the gate. "Sir, she's not on the guest list." "Open it," Tariq commanded, his voice leaving no room for argument. Luna stepped into the courtyard like she was entering a battlefield. The marble beneath her worn sneakers felt alien and cold, and the weight of dozens of stairs pressed down on her small shoulders. But she kept her chin up, just like her father had taught her. "What's your name, little one?" Tariq asked, his tone dripping with false sweetness. "Luna Martinez," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper, but clear as crystal. "Well, Luna Martinez," Tariq announced to the crowd, spreading his arms like a showman. "It seems my Ferrari has stumped the best mechanics money can buy. Perhaps you'd like to try." The suggestion hit the gathering like a lightning bolt. Nervous laughter rippled through the crowd, the kind that comes when people aren't sure if they should be amused or horrified. "Sir, surely you can't be serious," James Crawford protested, his professional pride wounded by the implication. But Tariq was deadly serious. In his mind, this was perfect. The little garbage girl would fail spectacularly, everyone would laugh, and his own embarrassment would be forgotten in the face of such absurd theater. Social media would eat it up. "Billionaire asks street child to fix Ferrari" would trend for hours, shifting focus from his failure to the entertainment value of the moment. "Tell you what, Luna," Tariq continued, his smile growing wider and more vicious. "If you can fix my Ferrari, it's yours. $12 million, just like that." The crowd exploded. Phones appeared from every angle, capturing Luna's reaction. Some people giggled, others shook their heads in disbelief, and a few shifted uncomfortably at the obvious cruelty of the gesture. Luna looked past Tariq to the silent Ferrari, its hood still raised like a patient waiting for surgery. She could see the mechanics' tools scattered around it, evidence of their frustrated attempts, but more importantly, she could hear something they couldn't, the subtle whisper of misaligned airflow that spoke to her like a familiar voice. "Can I look at it?" she asked. Tariq's laugh was sharp and humorless. "By all means, little mechanic. Show us what you've learned in auto shop." More cruel laughter from the crowd. Someone in the back shouted, "This is crazy!" Another voice called out, "Let the kid try." What's the worst that could happen? Luna approached the Ferrari as if it were a wounded animal. She ignored the cameras, the whispers, the barely contained laughter. Her father's voice echoed in her memory. "Respect the machine, Misha. Listen to what it's trying to tell you." She stood on her tiptoes to peer into the engine bay, her small hands gripping the edge for balance. The V12 engine sprawled before her like a beautiful, complex puzzle. But Luna wasn't intimidated by complexity. She was energized by it. The mechanics had focused on the obvious suspects: spark plugs, fuel injectors, electrical connections. They'd run diagnostics, checked computer systems, tested every major component, but they'd missed something fundamental, something so simple that it hid in plain sight. Luna's eyes traced the intake manifold, following the path of airflow through the system. There, barely visible unless you knew exactly where to look, was a tiny vacuum line that had worked itself loose, not disconnected entirely, which would have triggered an obvious error code, but loose enough to create a lean mixture that prevented ignition. It was the automotive equivalent of a whisper, and Luna heard it clearly. "May I touch it?" she asked politely. The question sent another wave of amusement through the crowd. Tariq nodded magnanimously, playing to his audience. "Of course, dear, touch whatever you like." Luna reached into the engine bay with the confidence of someone who belonged there. Her small fingers, stained with the honest dirt of hard work, located the loose vacuum line with surgical precision. With a gentle but firm twist, she reconnected it to its proper position. Then she closed the hood and stepped back. "Try it now," she said simply. The silence that followed Luna's words was deafening. Tariq stood frozen, his hand hovering over the key, suddenly aware that every eye in the courtyard was watching him. The weight of his own words pressed down on him like a physical force. "If you can fix my Ferrari, it's yours." He had meant it as a joke, a cruel punchline to deflect from his own humiliation. But now, faced with the possibility that this 6-year-old street child might have actually diagnosed what his team of experts had missed, the joke felt less funny and infinitely more dangerous. "Go ahead, Mr. Al-Nashwan," called out Rebecca Chen, a tech journalist whose live stream had already garnered over 50,000 viewers. "Let's see if the little lady knows her engines." Tariq forced a laugh, but it sounded hollow even to his own ears. Of course, though I'm sure we're all just humoring." He turned the key. The Ferrari's V12 engine erupted to life with a roar that seemed to shake the very foundations of the hotel. The sound was pure, powerful, perfect, exactly as it should be. The engine purred with the satisfied contentment of a mechanical masterpiece finally breathing freely again. The courtyard fell into stunned silence. James Crawford's wrench slipped from his fingers, clattering against the marble. The other mechanics stood with their mouths agape, staring at Luna as if she had just performed actual magic. Tariq's world tilted on its axis. This wasn't possible. This couldn't be happening. A homeless child with dirty hands and holes in her shoes had just accomplished what his team of certified experts, with their decades of experience and advanced diagnostic equipment, had failed to do. How? The word escaped his lips before he could stop it. Luna pointed to a spot in the engine bay that looked identical to every other spot to untrained eyes. The vacuum line was loose. When air leaks in where it shouldn't, the computer gets confused about how much fuel to add. It's like trying to tune a guitar with a broken string. Her explanation was so simple, so logical, that it made the expert's failure seem almost criminal. James Crawford moved to inspect her work, his pride warring with professional curiosity. What he found made his face go pale. "She's right," he announced to the crowd, his voice barely above a whisper. The line was maybe a quarter turn loose, just enough to throw off the air-fuel mixture. We all missed it. The implications hit the gathering like a tsunami. Phones that had been recording for entertainment suddenly captured something much more significant, a moment that challenged every assumption they had about intelligence, capability, and worth. The little girl they had been laughing at moments before had just demonstrated a level of mechanical intuition that bordered on genius. Rebecca Chen stepped forward, her journalistic instincts kicking into overdrive. "Luna, where did you learn to work on engines?" "My papa taught me," Luna replied, her voice growing stronger with each word. "He used to fix cars before his accident. Now his hands don't work so good, so he teaches me instead." "And how long have you been working on engines?" "Since I was little." The irony of her answer, she was still little, wasn't lost on anyone. This child had been diagnosing mechanical problems since she could barely walk, developing skills through necessity and natural talent that grown men with engineering degrees couldn't match. Tariq found himself trapped in a nightmare of his own making. Around him, the crowd began to murmur, their whispers growing louder with each passing second. He could see the headlines forming in real time. "Billionaire humiliated by 6-year-old mechanic." "Street child outsmarts team of experts." "The Ferrari fix that changed everything." His carefully crafted image was crumbling, but that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was the growing realization that he had made a promise in front of witnesses, recorded by dozens of cameras, and broadcast live to thousands of viewers. The Ferrari, his prized possession, his symbol of dominance, now legally belonged to a homeless child. "Well," Rebecca Chen said, her voice cutting through his spiraling thoughts. "I guess congratulations are in order. Luna, you just became the youngest Ferrari owner in history." The crowd erupted. Some applauded, others laughed in disbelief, and a few began placing rapid phone calls to news desks and social media managers. This was the kind of story that could go viral within hours. David and Goliath with horsepower and heartbreak. But Tariq's mind raced beyond the immediate humiliation. $12 million. That was what he had just promised to give away. And while money wasn't a problem for him, the precedent was terrifying. What would happen when word got out that his promises could be taken literally? When every desperate person with a sob story came looking for their own miracle windfall? No, he couldn't let this stand. "Now let's not get ahead of ourselves," he said, his voice regaining some of its authority. "This was clearly just a bit of fun. A joke between friends. Nobody seriously expected." "A joke?" Luna interrupted, her small voice somehow cutting through his bluster like a knife. "You said if I fixed your car, it would be mine. I fixed it. Everyone heard you." The crowd murmured its agreement. Phones continued recording. The livestream viewer count climbed past 100,000. Tariq felt the walls closing in. Every face in the crowd looked at him expectantly, waiting to see what kind of man he really was beneath the expensive suits and calculated charm. Would he honor his word, or would he reveal himself as the kind of person who made promises he never intended to keep? The choice he made in the next few moments would define not just this day, but the entire trajectory of two lives that had collided in the most unexpected way possible. "Legal technicality," Tariq announced, his voice taking on the sharp edge of a man accustomed to having teams of lawyers solve his problems. "The child is a minor. She can't legally own a vehicle, much less one worth $12 million. This entire situation is absurd." The crowd's energy shifted, sensing the billionaire's retreat. What had started as an entertaining spectacle was evolving into something darker, a real-time lesson in how the powerful maintained their advantages when challenged by the powerless. Rebecca Chen's journalistic instincts sharpened. But surely the intent of the promise matters more than technical loopholes. You made an offer, it was accepted, and the conditions were met, in front of witnesses and on live stream. "I made a joke," Tariq snapped, his composure beginning to crack. "Does anyone here seriously believe I intended to give away a priceless automobile to a street child? The entire premise is ridiculous." Luna stood perfectly still, but tears began forming in her eyes. Not tears of disappointment. She had never really believed the Ferrari would be hers, but tears of recognition. This was how her world worked. Promises from powerful people meant nothing. Hope was a luxury she couldn't afford. But the crowd was less accepting of Tariq's backtracking. Among the wealthy elite, many had children of their own, and watching a grown man humiliate a 6-year-old was beginning to leave a bad taste in their mouths. The entertainment value was wearing off, replaced by something uglier. "That's cold, man," called out Marcus Washington, a young tech entrepreneur who had live-streamed the entire event to his 2 million followers. "Oh, she held up her end of the deal." "Deal?" Tariq laughed, but the sound was harsh and defensive. There was no deal. There was a grown man making an offhand comment about an impossible scenario that, against all logic and reason, somehow came to pass. "I'm not legally or morally obligated to bankrupt myself because a child got lucky." "Bankrupt?" Rebecca's eyebrows shot up. "Weren't you just telling us how this Ferrari was like pocket change to you? That 12 million was nothing compared to your petroleum fortune." The trap was springing closed around him, and Tariq could feel it. Every word he spoke was being recorded, every excuse dissected in real time by an audience that was growing more hostile by the minute. But backing down wasn't in his nature. Men like him didn't become billionaires by honoring inconvenient promises to children. "The practical implications alone make this impossible," he continued, his voice taking on the patronizing tone of someone explaining obvious facts to simpletons. "Where would she park it? How would she maintain it? How would she even reach the pedals? The whole concept is absurd." Luna finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper but somehow carrying across the entire courtyard. "I wouldn't drive it. I would sell it." The simple statement hit the gathering like a thunderbolt. Of course she would sell it. She was homeless, hungry, desperate. The Ferrari wasn't a toy to her. It was survival, education, hope, and a future all wrapped into one beautiful machine. Sell it for what? Tariq demanded, sensing an opportunity to regain control of the narrative. $12 million to a 6-year-old. To buy what? Candy, toys. Children can't comprehend that kind of money. Food, Luna replied, her voice growing stronger. Medicine for my papa. A house so we don't sleep in the car anymore. School supplies so I can learn to read better. Her words hung in the air like an indictment. While Tariq collected cars worth millions, this child dreamed of basic necessities that most people took for granted. The contrast was stark, uncomfortable, and impossible to ignore. The crowd's sympathy was shifting decisively toward Luna. Camera phones captured every moment, every expression, every word. The hashtag Jasha Ferrari Girl had already begun trending, and the story was spreading across social media platforms at viral speed. James Crawford, who had been silent during the exchange, finally stepped forward. His professional reputation had taken a beating today, but his conscience was demanding action. Mr. Al-Nashwan, he said carefully, in my 30 years working on luxury vehicles, I've never seen diagnostic skills like this child possesses. What she did today, it wasn't luck, it was pure talent. Tariq whirled on his employee. Are you seriously suggesting that I should hand over $12 million because you and your team were incompetent? The insult hit its mark. James's face darkened, but he stood his ground. I'm suggesting that honor means something, that promises matter, that sometimes we encounter people whose gifts humble us, regardless of their circumstances. The courtyard buzzed with tension. Lines were being drawn. Sides were being chosen, and Tariq found himself increasingly isolated despite being surrounded by his own event. The story had taken on a life of its own, spiraling beyond his control in ways that would have seemed impossible an hour earlier. But Tariq Al-Nashwan hadn't become one of the world's youngest billionaires by surrendering to public pressure. If the crowd wanted a villain, he would give them one. If they expected him to bow to sentiment and social media outrage, they would be disappointed. He had built his fortune by making hard decisions that others couldn't stomach. This would be no different. Security, Tariq called out, his voice cutting through the crowd's murmuring like a blade. Please escort this child off the property. She's disrupting a private event. The words fell like stones into still water, creating ripples of shock that spread through the gathered crowd. 2 uniformed guards began moving toward Luna, their faces uncomfortable but their duty clear. Wait. Rebecca Chen stepped between the guards and Luna, her phone still recording. You're seriously going to have a 6-year-old removed by security after she just proved herself more capable than your entire team of experts? I'm maintaining order at my event, Tariq replied coldly. This has gone far enough. But the crowd wasn't letting him off so easily. Marcus Washington pushed forward, his live stream viewer count now exceeding 200,000 and climbing. This is unbelievable. You're literally calling security on a kid because she made you look bad. She made my mechanics look incompetent, Tariq shot back. Which, apparently, they are. James Crawford's face went red. Sir, with all due respect, you're making yourself look bad. This child has a gift, and instead of recognizing it, I'm what? Tariq's voice rose dangerously. I'm refusing to hand over $12 million based on a joke that got out of hand. I'm declining to set a precedent that every street performer with a sob story can extort money from me. I'm being practical instead of sentimental. Luna stood perfectly still as the argument raged around her. She had seen this before, adults fighting over things that had nothing to do with her while she remained invisible in the center of the storm. But this felt different. For the first time in her young life, people were fighting for her instead of over her. Mr. Al-Nashwan, a new voice cut through the chaos. Elena Vasquez, a local news anchor whose crew had arrived just minutes earlier, pushed through the crowd with her cameraman close behind. Elena Vasquez, Channel 7 News. Can you confirm that you offered to give your Ferrari to this child if she could repair it? Tariq's jaw tightened. Local news meant the story was officially beyond his control. Within hours, it would be on every major network. By morning, international outlets would pick it up. His reputation, carefully crafted over decades, was being dissected in real time. I made a humorous comment that was taken out of context, he said, but his voice lacked conviction. We have multiple recordings of your exact words, Elena replied smoothly. "When if you can fix my Ferrari, it's yours." Those were your words, correct? The trap was complete. Deny it, and he'd be caught in a lie with video evidence to prove it. Admit it, and he'd be forced to explain why he was reneging on a promise to a child. Luna tugged on Elena's sleeve. The news anchor knelt down to the child's level, bringing the microphone closer. "What would you like people to know, Luna?" Elena asked gently. Luna looked directly into the camera, her young face serious but unafraid. "I just wanted to help," she said simply. "When things are broken, I try to fix them. That's what my papa taught me." The innocence of her statement was devastating. Here was a child whose only crime was possessing exceptional talent and the desire to help, being punished for making a powerful man uncomfortable. Marcus Washington's livestream exploded with comments. Viewers were sharing the stream at unprecedented rates, and a Ferrari girl was trending not just locally, but nationwide. The story had tapped into something deeper than entertainment. It had become a symbol of inequality, broken promises, and the way society treated its most vulnerable members. "This is bigger than one car," Marcus announced to his audience and the crowd simultaneously. "This is about whether we live in a world where promises mean something, where talent gets recognized regardless of where it comes from, where powerful people are held accountable for their words." Tariq felt the narrative slipping completely out of his hands. What had started as damage control was becoming a public relations catastrophe of epic proportions. Every second he delayed, every excuse he made, every attempt to justify his position only made him look worse. But surrendering the Ferrari would set an impossible precedent. Word would spread that Tariq al-Nashwan could be manipulated through public pressure. Other situations would arise, other demands would be made, other crowds would gather with cameras and expectations. The security guards reached Luna, their hands hovering uncertainly near her small shoulders. The image, two grown men in uniform preparing to remove a 6-year-old child from a luxury hotel while billionaires watched, was pure visual poison for any public figure. "Don't touch her," Rebecca Chen warned, her phone capturing every angle. "There are too many cameras here for this to end well for anyone." Elena Vasquez stepped closer to Tariq, her microphone extended like a sword. "Mr. al-Nashwan, this story is going to be told whether you participate or not. This is your chance to control the narrative. What do you want people to understand about who you are?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. In this moment, with the world watching, Tariq would reveal his true character. Would he be remembered as the billionaire who honored his word to a gifted child, or as the man who called security when a 6-year-old made him uncomfortable? The choice was his, but the consequences would belong to everyone. The silence stretched like a taut wire about to snap. Tariq could feel the weight of hundreds of thousands of eyes on him, not just the crowd in the courtyard, but the growing online audience whose judgment would follow him long after the cameras stopped rolling. Every second of hesitation made him look weaker, more petty, more exposed. His phone buzzed incessantly in his pocket. His publicist, his lawyers, his board members, all undoubtedly watching this unfold in real time and scrambling to contain the damage. But there was no containing this. The story had escaped his control the moment Luna's small hands had brought his Ferrari back to life. "You know what?" Tariq said finally, his voice carrying a forced lightness that fooled no one. "Let's make this interesting." The crowd leaned forward. Elena's cameraman adjusted his angle. Marcus's live stream viewers peaked at nearly 500,000. "I'll tell you what I'll do," Tariq continued, beginning to pace like a predator circling prey. "Since everyone seems so convinced that this child is some sort of mechanical prodigy, let's put it to a real test." Luna's small hand found James Crawford's sleeve, instinctively seeking protection from whatever was coming next. The mechanic looked down at her with something approaching paternal protectiveness. "I have 12 classic cars in my private collection here in Miami," Tariq announced, "each one worth more than most people make in a lifetime. If little Luna here can diagnose and fix problems with 3 randomly selected vehicles, without help, without hints, without her newfangled mechanical genius failing her, then yes, she can have the Ferrari." The crowd murmured uncertainly. This felt less like fairness and more like a game rigged against a child. "But," Tariq continued, his smile turning sharp, "when she fails, and she will fail because what happened here was pure luck, She agrees to never come near my properties again. No more trash collection, no more lurking around my events, no more disrupting my business. That's not fair, Rebecca Chen protested. She's 6 years old. You're setting up a child to fail just to protect your ego. I'm offering her a chance to prove herself, Tariq replied smoothly. If she's really the miracle worker you all seem to think she is, this should be easy. If she's just a lucky child who got in over her head, then we can all stop this ridiculous charade and get back to reality. Eleanor stepped closer. And if she succeeds, you'll honor your original promise. If she succeeds with 3 out of 3 vehicles, Tariq nodded. But let's make it interesting for everyone. Each car she fails to fix costs her something. First failure. She leaves and never comes back. Second failure. He paused for effect. Her father's mechanic tools get confiscated. We wouldn't want dangerous equipment in the hands of people who can't use it properly. The cruelty of the threat hit the gathering like a physical blow. Tariq wasn't just challenging Luna. He was threatening to destroy her father's livelihood, the family's only source of income and dignity. Luna's eyes filled with tears, but not from fear, from anger. Pure, righteous anger at the unfairness of a world where powerful men could threaten families for their own entertainment. That's sick, Marcus said into his live stream. This guy is literally threatening to take away a disabled man's tools because his daughter embarrassed him. But Luna stepped forward, her small chin raised in defiance. I'll do it. Luna, no, James Crawford whispered urgently. You don't have to prove anything to anyone. Yes, I do, she replied, her voice stronger than anyone expected. He thinks I got lucky. He thinks my papa didn't teach me right. He thinks poor people can't know things that rich people don't know. She looked directly at Tariq. I'll take your test. The crowd fell silent. This 6-year-old child was about to go head-to-head with a billionaire in front of the world, with her family's survival hanging in the balance. Tariq's smile widened. He had her exactly where he wanted her, trapped by her own pride and the crowd's expectations. 3 complex mechanical problems, each one carefully chosen to expose the limitations of her knowledge. By the time this was over, the narrative would shift completely. Instead of the heartless billionaire, he would become the patient mentor who taught the world not to mistake luck for skill. Excellent, he said, pulling out his phone. Miguel, bring the cars around. We're going to give everyone a show they'll never forget. Within 20 minutes, 3 vehicles appeared in the courtyard. A 1955 Mercedes-Benz 300 SL Gullwing with a stuttering engine, a 1970 Plymouth Barracuda that wouldn't start, and a 1963 Jaguar E-Type with transmission problems. Each one represented millions of dollars and decades of automotive engineering evolution. The crowd had swelled to nearly 100 people. Hotel guests had abandoned their poolside drinks to witness the spectacle. News crews from 3 local stations had arrived. The live stream audience had topped 1 million viewers as word spread across social media platforms. Luna walked slowly around each vehicle, her trained eye cataloguing details that others missed. The weight of expectations pressed down on her small shoulders, but underneath the pressure, she felt something else. Excitement. These weren't just cars to her, they were puzzles, each one with its own personality and problems waiting to be solved. Timer starts now, Tariq announced as Luna approached the Mercedes. 1 hour per car, no outside help, no reference materials, just you and your supposed gift. What he didn't know, what none of them knew except James Crawford, who had worked with enough mechanics to recognize true talent, was that Luna wasn't nervous about the cars themselves. She was nervous about the eyes watching her, the cameras recording her every move, the knowledge that failure meant losing everything her family had left. But as her small hands opened the Mercedes hood and the familiar smell of engine oil filled her nostrils, the outside world began to fade away. This was her element, her language, her home. The real test was about to begin. Luna stood before the Mercedes-Benz 300 SL Gullwing, its iconic silhouette gleaming under the Miami sun. The car was worth over $2 million, a masterpiece of 1950s German engineering that most mechanics would approach with reverence and terror. But Luna saw only another patient waiting for diagnosis. She climbed onto a maintenance stool someone had provided, giving her the height needed to peer into the engine bay. The fuel-injected straight-six engine was a marvel of precision engineering, its components arranged with mathematical beauty. But something was wrong. She could hear it in the irregular idle, see it in the subtle vibration that ran through the frame. 58 minutes remaining, Tariq announced unnecessarily, his voice carrying across the courtyard where the crowd had arranged itself in a rough amphitheater. The livestream audience had grown to nearly 2 million viewers, with major news outlets beginning to pick up the story. Luna ignored him, focusing on the engine's whispered complaints. Her trained ear, honed by years of necessity, caught subtleties that expensive diagnostic equipment might miss. The problem wasn't in the major systems. Fuel, ignition, compression all sounded normal. This was something more delicate, more hidden. She began a systematic examination, her small hands moving with the confidence of someone who belonged in this space. The air intake seemed clear. The fuel lines showed no obvious leaks. The electrical connections appeared solid, but there a barely perceptible irregularity in the engine's breathing pattern. "What's she doing?" whispered Elena Vasquez to her cameraman. "She's been looking at the same area for 10 minutes. What Luna had found was a tiny crack in the intake manifold, so small it was invisible unless you knew exactly where to look and had the patience to trace every surface. The crack was allowing unmeasured air into the system, creating a lean fuel mixture that caused the stuttering idle. But recognizing the problem was only half the battle. Fixing it would require precision, creativity, and tools she didn't have. "Time to give up yet," Tariq called out, but his voice carried less confidence than before. Luna's methodical approach was beginning to worry him. This didn't look like guesswork or luck. It looked like expertise. Luna finally spoke, her voice carrying clearly across the courtyard. "I need aluminum epoxy and a heat gun." James Crawford stepped forward with a small container and tool. "Will these work?" Luna nodded, accepting the materials with the gravity of a surgeon receiving instruments. What followed was 15 minutes of careful work as she cleaned the crack area, applied the epoxy with microscopic precision, and used the heat gun to cure the repair. Her movements were economical, confident, born from years of making broken things whole again. "Start it up," she said finally, stepping back from the Mercedes. Tariq climbed into the driver's seat, his expression unreadable. When he turned the key, the engine came to life with a purr as smooth as silk. The stuttering was gone, replaced by the mechanical poetry that made the 300 SL legendary. The crowd erupted in applause. The live stream exploded with comments. Eleanor's news crew captured every moment of Tariq's stunned expression as he revved the engine and heard perfection respond. "One down," Luna said simply, already walking toward the Plymouth Barracuda. The muscle car presented a different challenge entirely. Where the Mercedes was precision engineering, the Barracuda was raw American power, a 440 cubic inch V8 designed for straight-line speed and thunderous noise. But it sat silent, refusing to even attempt ignition. Luna's approach to the Plymouth was different, more aggressive. Muscle cars were less subtle about their problems. When they failed, they usually failed dramatically. She popped the hood and immediately checked the most obvious culprits: battery terminals, ignition coil, distributor cap. 37 minutes remaining for the second car, Tariq announced, but his voice had lost its mocking edge. The crowd was fully on Luna's side now, their energy shifting from curiosity to genuine investment in her success. The Plymouth's problem revealed itself quickly. A corroded connection in the ignition system was preventing spark from reaching the engine. But the corrosion was hidden deep within the distributor assembly, invisible without complete disassembly. Working with practiced efficiency, Luna dismantled the distributor, cleaned the corroded contacts with steel wool from James's toolbox, and reassembled everything with the confidence of someone who had performed the procedure dozens of times before. "Try it now," she said, wiping her hands on her already dirty shirt. Tariq slid behind the wheel of the Plymouth, his movements less confident than before. When he turned the key, the big V8 roared to life with a sound like controlled thunder. The car that had been dead minutes before now rumbled with barely contained power. "Two down," Luna announced, but she was already focused on the final challenge, the Jaguar E-Type. The British sports car was arguably the most beautiful of the three vehicles, its flowing lines a masterpiece of automotive art. But beauty meant nothing if the transmission wouldn't engage, and the Jaguar's gearbox was refusing to cooperate with even the simplest commands. Transmission problems were complex, requiring knowledge of hydraulics, mechanical linkages, and the subtle interactions between dozens of moving parts. For many mechanics, transmission work was a specialized field requiring years of additional training. But Luna had grown up in a world where every mechanical problem was a survival challenge. Her father had taught her that no system was too complex if you understood its fundamental purpose, to translate power from one form to another. She crawled under the Jaguar, her small size actually an advantage in the cramped space beneath the car. What she found there would determine not just the outcome of this challenge, but the entire trajectory of her family's future. The crowd watched in tense silence as her legs disappeared beneath the British icon, knowing that their young champion was about to face her greatest test yet. Under the Jaguar E-Type, Luna found herself in a mechanical cathedral. The car's undercarriage was a symphony of engineering elegance, every component precisely placed, every line purposeful and clean. But somewhere in this automotive artwork, a problem lurked that had stumped Tariq's regular mechanics. Her father had taught her that transmissions were like rivers. Power flowed in, got redirected through channels and gates, and emerged transformed. When transmissions failed, it usually meant a blockage, a broken gate, or a leak that disrupted the flow. 22 minutes remaining, Tariq called out, though his voice now carried obvious tension. 2 impossible successes had shaken his confidence. The crowd's energy had shifted completely against him, and social media was painting him as the villain in a David and Goliath story that was being watched by millions. Luna's small hands explored the transmission housing, feeling for vibrations, listening for sounds that didn't belong. The problem wasn't immediately obvious, which meant it was either very subtle or very serious. Given that the car had been working fine yesterday, according to Tariq's staff, she suspected subtlety over catastrophe. Her fingers found the transmission fluid dipstick and pulled it free. The fluid level was fine, but the consistency felt wrong. Too thick, with tiny metal particles that suggested internal wear. But that wasn't the main problem. The main problem was what she found when she followed the shift linkage from the transmission to the gear selector. There, barely visible in the shadows, was a single bolt that had worked itself loose. Not completely free, which would have made the problem obvious, but loose enough to allow the shift linkage to bind at certain angles. It was the mechanical equivalent of a grain of sand in a watch, tiny, nearly invisible, but capable of stopping everything. But reaching the bolt would require contortions that most adult mechanics simply couldn't manage. The space was designed for maintenance access, not repair work, and the engineers who built the E-Type had clearly assumed that transmission problems would be solved by removing the entire unit. Luna, however, had spent years squeezing into impossible spaces, under cars in junkyards, behind washing machines in laundromats, into crawl spaces that adults couldn't access. Her small size, usually a disadvantage in a world built for grown-ups, finally became her greatest asset. She positioned herself at an angle that would have been impossible for anyone larger, her arm threading through a gap between the exhaust manifold and the transmission housing. The bolt was just within reach if she stretched to her absolute limit, ignoring the hot metal pressing against her shoulder and the sharp edges trying to tear her shirt. "What's she doing under there?" Marcus Washington asked his live-stream audience, the camera unable to capture the precise nature of Luna's work. "She's been under the car for 15 minutes now." Above her, Luna could hear the crowd's growing restlessness. Some people were beginning to doubt, wondering if she had finally met her match. Tariq's voice carried a note of renewed confidence as he provided commentary for the news crews. "Transmission work is extremely complex," he was saying. "It requires specialized tools, diagnostic equipment, years of training. I respect what she accomplished with the first 2 vehicles, but this is simply beyond." The bolt finally yielded to Luna's wrench, turning with the satisfying click of a problem solved. She quickly tightened it to the proper specification, not too tight, which would stress the housing, but snug enough to prevent future loosening. She slid out from under the Jaguar, her clothes even dirtier than before, her face streaked with grease and determination. The crowd fell silent as she stood and walked to the driver's side door. "Try the transmission now," she said simply. Tariq approached the car with obvious reluctance. Everything was riding on this moment. His reputation, his credibility, his carefully constructed image as a man who controlled every situation. If Luna succeeded here, He would be forced to honor his promise in front of millions of witnesses. He slid behind the wheel and started the engine. The E-Type purred to life with typical British refinement. Then he engaged first gear. The transmission responded perfectly, sliding into gear with the smooth precision that had made Jaguars legendary. Second gear, third, reverse. Every selection was flawless, the mechanical binding completely eliminated. The crowd exploded. Cheers, applause, and shocked laughter filled the courtyard as people realized what they had just witnessed. A 6-year-old child had just outperformed teams of professional mechanics on 3 consecutive complex repairs, each one worth millions of dollars. Marcus's livestream went viral in real time, shared across platforms faster than the algorithms could track. Our Ferrari girl became a global phenomenon, trending in dozens of countries as the story spread beyond automotive enthusiasts to anyone who had ever been underestimated, overlooked, or dismissed. Luna stood quietly in the center of the chaos, her young face serious despite the celebration around her. She had proven her point, validated her father's teaching, and demonstrated that talent could emerge from anywhere. But she also understood something that the cheering crowd didn't. This was only the beginning of her challenges, not the end. Tariq sat in the Jaguar, his hands gripping the steering wheel, his world fundamentally altered by what had just occurred. The child he had tried to humiliate had just achieved something that would be talked about for years. Every excuse he had prepared, every justification he had constructed, crumbled in the face of undeniable proof. Elena Vasquez pushed through the crowd, her microphone extended toward Luna. "How does it feel to have just made automotive history?" Luna looked up at the reporter with eyes that seemed far older than her 6 years. "I just did what my papa taught me," she said. "When something's broken, you figure out why and you fix it. That's all." The simplicity of her answer somehow made her achievement even more extraordinary. While others saw genius or miracle or impossibility, Luna saw only the natural result of paying attention, working hard, and refusing to give up. But the hardest part was still coming. Now Tariq had to decide whether he was a man of his word or just another powerful person who broke promises when they became inconvenient. The entire world was watching, and there was nowhere left to hide. The courtyard fell into an eerie silence as the reality of what had just occurred settled over everyone present. Luna had done the impossible, not once but 3 times in a row. The cameras continued rolling. The live stream audience had swelled to over 5 million viewers worldwide, and news helicopters circled overhead like mechanical vultures waiting to broadcast the resolution of this unprecedented confrontation. Tariq remained seated in the Jaguar, the engine purring perfectly beneath his hands. Every second of his hesitation was being recorded, analyzed, and judged by millions of people. His phone buzzed incessantly with calls from lawyers, publicists, and board members, all desperately trying to manage a crisis that had spiraled completely beyond their control. Elena Vasquez stepped forward, her microphone catching every nuance of the moment. "Mr. Al-Nashwan, Luna has successfully completed your challenge. All 3 vehicles have been repaired by a 6-year-old child using nothing but basic tools and extraordinary skill. Will you honor your promise?" The question hung in the air like a sword suspended by a thread. Tariq could feel the weight of history pressing down on him. This wasn't just about one Ferrari anymore. It was about what kind of world they lived in, whether promises mattered, whether talent could triumph over privilege, whether a powerful man's word had any value when tested by an unlikely challenger. He climbed slowly out of the Jaguar, his movements deliberate and careful. The crowd watched every gesture, every expression, looking for clues about which version of himself he would choose to be. "Luna," he said finally, his voice carrying across the courtyard with unexpected gentleness. "Come here, please." Luna approached cautiously, her small hand instinctively reaching for James Crawford's reassuring presence. She had learned not to trust adults who use soft voices after demonstrating their power, but something in Tariq's demeanor had changed fundamentally. When she reached him, Tariq knelt down to her eye level, a gesture that was captured by dozens of cameras and would be replayed millions of times in the coming days. For the first time since this ordeal began, he looked directly into her eyes and saw not a threat to his reputation, but a child whose gifts had humbled him completely. "You did something today that I thought was impossible," he said, his voice thick with emotion he hadn't expected to feel. You proved that talent doesn't care about background, education, or circumstances. You proved that I was wrong. About you, about promises, about what matters most in this world. He reached into his pocket and withdrew the Ferrari's key fob, the small device worth $12 million, feeling impossibly heavy in his hand. The crowd held its breath as he extended it toward Luna. "Tess, this belongs to you," he said simply. "You earned it fair and square, and I'm honored to give it to someone who understands engines better than mechanics, with 30 years of experience." Luna stared at the key fob for a long moment, its red Ferrari logo gleaming in the Miami sunshine. When she finally spoke, her words shocked everyone. "I don't want it," she said quietly. The crowd erupted in confused murmurs. Tariq's eyebrows shot up in surprise. Even the live stream comments exploded with bewilderment as millions of viewers tried to process what they had just heard. "You don't want it?" Tariq asked, certain he had misunderstood. "I want something else," Luna replied, her young voice carrying a wisdom that silenced the entire courtyard. "I want you to teach other people what you learned today. I want you to help kids like me who know how to fix things but don't have chances to show it. I want you to remember that smart doesn't look the same on everyone." Her words hit the gathering like lightning. This 6-year-old child, offered $12 million for her extraordinary skills, was choosing instead to ask for something more valuable: change, opportunity, hope for others like herself. Tariq felt tears forming in his eyes for the first time in decades. In trying to humiliate this child, he had instead been taught the most important lesson of his privileged life. 6 months later, the Luna Martinez Center for Automotive Excellence opened in downtown Miami, funded entirely by Tariq Al-Nashwan and operated in partnership with local schools and community organizations. The state-of-the-art facility provided free mechanical training to underserved youth, with Luna serving as its youngest and most celebrated instructor. The viral video of Luna's impossible repairs had been viewed over 100 million times, spawning documentaries, news specials, and a children's book about believing in yourself, regardless of circumstances. But more importantly, it had changed lives in ways that money alone never could. James Crawford had resigned from Tariq's employ to become the center's head instructor, working alongside Miguel Martinez, whose expertise and experience finally had a proper platform. Together, they created a program that identified and nurtured mechanical talent wherever it emerged, regardless of background or circumstances. Tariq kept the Ferrari, but it became a symbol rather than a trophy. Displayed prominently in the center's lobby, it carried a simple plaque, fixed by Luna Martinez, age 6, proof that talent knows no boundaries. The billionaire himself was transformed by the experience. His business practices evolved to prioritize community investment and educational opportunities. He established scholarship funds, mentorship programs, and partnerships with technical schools across the country. The man who had once collected cars as symbols of dominance now collected stories of young people whose potential had been unlocked by opportunity. Luna continued her education, splitting her time between regular school and the center, where she taught other children that engines were just puzzles waiting to be solved. Her dream was no longer just to fix broken things, but to fix broken systems that prevented talented people from reaching their potential. The story became more than viral content. It became a movement. Fix It Forward spread across social media as people shared stories of hidden talents, unexpected expertise, and the importance of keeping promises, especially to children. Companies began re-evaluating their hiring practices. Schools restructured their programs to recognize different types of intelligence, and communities started looking more carefully at the gifts that existed in unexpected places. And sometimes, when the center was quiet in the evening and Luna was working on a particularly challenging repair, Tariq would stop by to watch, not to oversee or manage, but to remember the day a 6-year-old girl taught him that the most valuable things in life couldn't be bought, sold, or collected. They could only be shared. The world is full of hidden genius waiting to be discovered. Luna's story reminds us that talent doesn't come with a pedigree. It comes with passion, dedication, and the courage to try when everyone expects you to fail. In your own life, whose potential are you overlooking? What promises are you making that you need to honor? And most importantly, what broken things in your community are waiting for someone brave enough to say, I can fix that. Sometimes the smallest hands accomplish the greatest repairs, and sometimes the most powerful lesson comes from the most unexpected teacher. The question isn't whether you have what it takes to make a difference. It's whether you're willing to get your hands dirty trying.